Imagine sitting at a family dinner thinking it's just another gathering until your mom stands up and asks you to give your apartment to your sister. You say no, and a full chocolate cake hits your face. Hi, I'm Brielle. I bought my first home with my own savings, no help, no handouts. But apparently to my family, that meant I was selfish. What would you do if the people who raised you expected you to hand over everything you built, just because family comes first? Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to draw the line with family? Let's talk about it. They say freedom starts with a key. Mine came with chipped walls, outdated wallpaper, and a silence I finally owned. Standing in the middle of my freshly painted living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the distinct smell of latex primer, I exhaled for the first time all week. My arms were sore, my knees scuffed from hours of crouching on tarps, and the playlist I'd made for Move-In Day had long since stopped playing. But here I was, finally, a homeowner at 30, not because someone co-signed, not because I married into stability. I bought this 2-bedroom apartment 10 minutes from work by myself outright. No mortgage, no debt, no compromises. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid, like me. Outside the windows, the last patches of snow were melting along the sidewalks of Fort Collins. March had arrived, dragging the muddy promise of spring behind it. My coat still hung by the door, but inside it was warm. Maybe not from the old baseboard heaters, but from something deeper, a kind of earned comfort. Grandma used to say, if you wait for family to cheer you on, you might wait forever. I thought she was just being dramatic, the way older folks sometimes are when they've seen too much. But standing in my own space, holding a paint roller like a sword, I heard those words ring clearer than ever. I stepped back to survey my work. The almond paint I chose looked clean, soft against the bright morning light. The wallpaper underneath, a garish floral from some forgotten decade, was gone now, stripped piece by piece with my own hands. It had been oddly satisfying, like peeling off a layer of someone else's past to make room for my future. I grabbed the futon cushion off the floor and flopped onto it. My whole body ached, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind that told you you'd done something with your own strength, something real. My phone buzzed on top of a moving box labeled Kitchen Fragile. I reached for it, smiling when I saw the name, Sierra Martin. Still alive under all the paint fumes? I hit the call button. Barely, I said as she picked up. Pretty sure I've lost a few brain cells, but at least the walls aren't screaming 1978 anymore. Sierra laughed. So, domestic goddess now? When's the Pinterest reveal? Give me a week. Right now, it's just me, a microwave on the floor, and peanut butter sandwiches. You're officially a homeowner then. Congrats again, Brie. I hope you're celebrating with something stronger than Jif. Thanks. But no champagne yet, just cold coffee and a minor existential crisis. Well, when you're done scraping wallpaper and your soul, let's get tacos. My treat. Deal. After we hung up, I sat in the silence for a long minute. It wasn't an empty kind of silence. It was full, like holding your breath underwater, waiting for the surface. Then, as if on cue, my phone rang again. M-O-M, of course. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but I answered. Hi, sweetheart, came the bright, too-chipper tone of Denise Carter, my mother. How's the new place? I paused. It's good, lots of work, but I'm getting there. Oh, I bet, you always were so determined, she said, drawing out the word like it was a compliment and a criticism all at once. Listen, we're having a little family gathering next Saturday. Just something casual. Your sister Madison will be there with Kevin. I'm making pot roast. Can you come? I knew that voice. Too pleasant. Carefully wrapped in sugar but hiding something sharp. I think so, I said slowly. What's the occasion? Oh, nothing special. Just time to catch up. Family time. And could you bring one of those chocolate cakes from that bakery near your place? The one with the buttercream frosting? That bakery is 3 blocks from me. You've never mentioned it before. Well, I remember you said something once, And Madison loves that cake. Madison. Even now, her name came out like a melody, always center stage. Sure, I said, trying to sound casual. Who else is coming? Oh, just some of the usual. Aunts, uncles, cousins. Anything I should know? I pressed. No, just be here by 4, okay? Click. She hung up before I could reply. I sat there staring at the phone. That call had felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced the lines, even the part about the cake. The ache in my shoulders crept into my chest. I'd bought this place to find peace, to be left alone. But peace doesn't come easy in families where your worth has always been measured against someone else's milestones. I set the phone down and looked around my apartment again. It wasn't perfect. There was still wallpaper to strip in the hallway, a dishwasher that sounded like a dying lawnmower, and more boxes than shelf space. But it was mine, all of it. And maybe, just maybe, that was the problem. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, the cake box on my lap felt like a peace offering I didn't agree to. I stared at the house, white siding, navy shutters, flower beds that hadn't been touched since last fall. It looked the same as it always had, but today it felt like the front of a stage. I parked behind Uncle Leo's SUV. Aunt Karen's minivan was already there, along with a couple of cars I didn't recognize. So much for just a little get-together. Inside the bakery box was the chocolate cake my mother requested, the one with buttercream frosting and chocolate curls on top. I hadn't even wanted to walk into the shop this morning, much less spend $40 on a cake I wouldn't be staying long enough to enjoy. The front door opened before I knocked. There she is. Mom's voice bubbled out, too bright. She pulled me into a hug before I could even put the box down. Right on time! The scent of pot roast drifted from the kitchen. I stepped inside, and the noise of voices, laughing, clinking glasses, swelled like a party I hadn't been invited to properly. Hi, everyone, I managed, trying to smile. Madison was on the living room couch with Kevin, their fingers laced like ivy. She looked radiant in a flowy cream dress, her makeup flawless, her hair freshly curled. It was barely April, but she already had that effortless spring glow influencers charged to bottle. Brielle, she stood and came over. Her hug was quick and oddly formal. So glad you made it. I nodded. You look great. Kevin smiled politely, not getting up. My dad waved from across the room, then quickly went back to nodding at something Uncle Leo was saying. My cake was immediately whisked away by Mom and placed in the center of the dining table. It sat there like a trophy. The good china had been brought out. Gold trim, linen napkins, polished silverware. Not the usual paper plates and baked ziti crowd we usually had on spring weekends. Wow, full house, I said, scanning the room. Yes, isn't it lovely, Mom chirped, wiping a non-existent smudge from a charger plate. Families should make time for each other more often. I could feel it again, that subtle, off-key note, like a song just slightly out of tune. Dinner began with small talk, but it was the kind you'd hear at a corporate retreat. Everything sounded rehearsed, polite to the point of stiffness. How's work, Brielle? Aunt Karen asked, sipping white wine. It's good, I said. Still at the firm. Tax season's keeping us busy. Good girl, she nodded, but her eyes didn't linger. It wasn't until we all sat down, plates full of pot roast, mashed potatoes, and green beans, that I realized no one had asked me about my new apartment. No mention of the move, no questions about the renovations, just a silent avoidance, like it hadn't happened at all. I cut into my food mechanically, nodding along as Madison talked about a new Pilates studio opening downtown. Then came the spoon against the glass. Ting, ting. Everyone. Mom stood, holding her wine glass like a toastmaster. We're so grateful you could all be here today. I have some wonderful news to share. I set my fork down slowly. Our dear Madison. She paused, letting the room lean in. She's expecting. Gasps, cheers, claps. Madison's cheeks flushed prettily as Kevin wrapped an arm around her. Someone behind me murmured, "Finally." And, Mom continued, Kevin proposed last week. We're so thrilled. They're engaged. The applause got louder. I clapped too, genuinely happy for her, at least for this part. Congrats, I told Madison across the table. She beamed, but Mom wasn't done. There's just one more thing, she said, her tone shifting. And this is where we hope to share something truly special as a family. A ripple of anticipation moved around the room. My stomach dropped. You all know that Brielle recently bought a beautiful apartment, she began, turning toward me like she was introducing a PowerPoint slide. Such a proud moment for our family. Heads turned. Some murmured agreement. And Madison and Kevin, she continued, they're starting a family now. They'll need space. Stability. Here it comes. And Brielle, well, she lives alone, Mom said, her smile stretching too wide. And we thought, what a beautiful gesture it would be. I stopped chewing. My jaw froze. If Brielle would consider offering her apartment to Madison and Kevin, just for a fresh start. Silence. Then a few nods. That's such a generous idea, Aunt Karen said. Family always lifts each other. She doesn't need 2 bedrooms to herself, someone else whispered. I looked around, waiting for someone to laugh, to say this was a joke. But the room was solemn, nodding like this was a prayer circle. You're serious, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom placed a hand over her heart. Just think, sweetheart. You could always go back to renting for a while. Madison needs a real home for the baby, and your place is already perfect. My throat went dry. But it's mine, I said slowly. I bought it, with my own savings. Yes, and we're all so proud, Mom said quickly. But this is about love, about sacrifice. Kevin was looking anywhere but at me. Madison's face had turned soft and pleading. We're not asking for forever, she said. Just until we're on our feet. You're getting married, you have jobs. Why don't you rent a place together? I asked. Kevin spoke at last. Because we thought this would be easier. For whom? I sat back in my chair, blinking as if I'd missed a key sentence. But no, that was the whole pitch. They actually expected me to hand over my home like it was a casserole dish I wasn't using. Everyone around the table looked at me expectantly, like this was my cue. Did I hear that right? They actually want me to give up everything I've built? I didn't cry when they asked for my apartment. I didn't cry when they called me selfish. I cried when the cake hit my face. 30 minutes had passed since Denise, Mom, announced that my 2-bedroom apartment should be handed over like a wedding gift. The dining room had grown quiet except for the faint clinking of silverware on plates. Nobody said it out loud, but I could feel it in the air. They were waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. I sat there, back straight, eyes scanning the familiar space. The wallpaper still had the same faint yellow tint from my childhood. The chandelier above us flickered slightly, the same way it had during Thanksgiving dinners and awkward birthday parties. This house had history, but none of it had been kind to me. I appreciate everyone's concern, I said, folding my napkin carefully, but the apartment isn't up for discussion. There was a stillness, brief, brittle, before Mom jumped in with a smile so stretched it looked painful. Brielle, honey, don't be dramatic. It's just a matter of family priorities. I am family, I said, trying to keep my voice level, and I worked for that place. It's not a gift to give away. It's just space, she countered. You're one person. Madison and Kevin are starting a family. They need room. You don't. Kevin cleared his throat. He hadn't said much so far, but his silence had been loud enough. Now, though, he spoke, his voice clipped. It's about compassion. You're not using that space the way they could. I looked at him. You mean because I'm not married or pregnant? That makes my space wasted? Kevin's jaw tightened. That's not what I said. No, I replied. But that's exactly what you meant. Madison shifted in her seat, her cheeks red. She still hadn't said a word in my defense. She looked down at her lap like a child caught cheating on a test. Mom leaned in. We're not asking you to do something bad, sweetheart. We're asking you to be generous." "That apartment was bought with money Grandma left me," I reminded them. "She wanted us both to have a shot at stability." "And now your sister has a child on the way," Mom snapped. "Don't you want to support that?" The question didn't land like she'd hoped. For years, I'd folded under these kinds of questions, guilt-laced appeals masquerading as love. But something inside me had started to shift. Maybe it was the smell of fresh paint on my own walls. Maybe it was the feel of my own name on a deed. "Madison can support herself," I said. "She's an adult. She has a partner. They can find their own place." Madison finally looked up. "I just thought, maybe you'd understand. You always acted like you were better than me." That one stung. Not because it was true, but because it was so far from it. "I've never acted like I was better," I said quietly. "I just stopped expecting anyone to be proud of me." The silence that followed was jagged. I could feel eyes on me from every direction, some sympathetic, most annoyed. "She's always been difficult," Aunt Karen whispered, not bothering to hide her voice. "Ungrateful," Uncle Leo added, shaking his head. Then the tension cracked. Mom's hand reached for the cake I'd brought, the double-layered chocolate with buttercream frosting she had asked me to bring, and before I could process it, it was flying across the table. The room gasped, but no one moved to stop it. The cake hit me square in the face. Frosting smeared across my cheeks, splattered down my blouse, clung to strands of my hair. There was a beat of silence. Not one gasp of apology, not even a muttered oops. Just the sound of a fork dropping and the low hum of the refrigerator kicking on. I wiped the frosting from my eyes with the edge of my napkin. My hands shook, but not with shame, just clarity. The kind of clarity that comes only when something truly final happens. "I'm done," I said, rising slowly. My chair scraped against the floor like a warning shot. "I'm done pretending that any of this is normal." Madison looked stricken, but she didn't speak. Kevin crossed his arms like I'd thrown the cake at myself. Dad stared at the table. No one followed me as I walked to the door. I didn't slam it, I didn't yell. I just stepped into the night air, cake still cooling on my shirt like an insult that hadn't been cleaned up yet. Back at my apartment, I stripped off the frosting-soaked clothes and dropped them straight into a trash bag. I didn't even bother rinsing them. Some messes don't deserve to be salvaged. Then I went to the filing cabinet tucked in my bedroom closet and pulled out the folder marked Grandma, Estate. The paper inside was already familiar, but I read it again anyway, like I needed to confirm what I already knew. "The house shall be shared equally between Brielle and Madison Carter." Shared. I stared at the words until they blurred. My parents were still living in a house that was half mine. The house they had filled with expectations, obligations, and manipulations. The house where I was never first, where I was only useful if I was sacrificing. My fingers tightened around the edges of the document. Grandma had known. She hadn't said much near the end, but she'd seen things. Maybe this was her final way of balancing the scales. Maybe she had understood that silence wasn't the same as peace. And maybe, finally, I understood that too. The frosting had dried to a crust on my shirt collar, but the smell lingered, sickly sweet, like some cruel joke baked into memory. I hadn't scrubbed the stain out yet. I wanted to, of course, but something in me refused to wash it away. It was proof of what they'd done, of who I'd become after. Grandma always told me, be the kind of woman who keeps receipts. One day, you'll need them. I used to think she meant grocery slips or doctor bills. Now I knew better. The morning after the family meeting from hell, I sat at my tiny kitchen table, still wobbly from the move, and unfolded Grandma's will again. I'd read it 3 times since the cake incident, but this time, I read it like a contract, not a memory. Right there, underlined and notarized. The house shall be shared equally between Brielle and Madison Carter. Not Ron and Denise. Not Madison and Kevin. Me. They'd been living in that house out of goodwill or laziness. Maybe both. But it wasn't theirs to rule from like some kingdom of entitlement. Grandma had trusted me to know when enough was enough, and that time had come. I opened my laptop, typed real estate lawyer Fort Collins, and scrolled until a name popped out. Jeremy Blackwell. Clean website, no flashy promises, just, you deserve peace. Let's protect it. I scheduled a consultation for Thursday. The next few days passed in a fog of paint fumes and legal prep. My apartment, still half finished, became a quiet fortress. I boxed up the remnants of who I used to be. The old birthday cards no one signed, my college diploma no one acknowledged. I wasn't angry, not in the screaming sense. I was clear, focused, and for once that clarity didn't come with guilt. Jeremy Blackwell's office sat on the third floor of a brick building downtown, sandwiched between a yoga studio and a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and second chances. He greeted me with a firm handshake, a warm smile, and eyes that didn't flicker when I told him my story. No raised eyebrows, no, "Are you sure you're not overreacting?" Just, "You've come to the right place." We went over the will. He nodded slowly. "Legally, you have equal rights. If you want to sell your share, they can't stop you. They can buy you out, or you can force a sale. But first," he added, "we make sure the foundation is solid, emotionally and legally." I nodded, surprised by the tightness in my throat. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "But you also don't want to keep getting hurt." When I got home that evening, my phone had exploded. 6 missed calls from Mom, 2 voicemails from Aunt Karen, and a flood of messages that danced around one word: selfish. But it wasn't the texts that broke me. It was the Facebook post, a photo of Grandma's house taken at dusk, captioned by Denise, "Please pray for our family. Some choices hurt deeper than we can say. Hannah, wherever your soul wanders, may you find your way back to us." Hannah? My middle name? The one they used when they wanted to hurt me without saying it outright. I stared at the screen. Dozens of comments below. A heart emoji from Pastor Lewis. A crying face from the neighbor who once called me the quiet one. I wasn't tagged, but I didn't have to be. Everyone knew. Fake sympathy. Thinly veiled judgment. "We're thinking of you. Some people forget where they come from." Family first, always. I blocked them all. I opened a new document. The heading, Notice of Intent to Sell Inherited Property. I didn't fill it out that night, but I saved the file, like a promise to myself. 2 days later, it escalated. I heard the banging before I even reached the door. Through the peephole, I saw Madison's tear-streaked face, Kevin pacing behind her like a caged animal, and my mother, flushed, tight-lipped, eyes wild. I didn't open the door. Instead, I hit record on my phone. For 15 minutes, I stood behind the door as they shouted, "You're tearing this family apart. What kind of daughter does this after all we've done? She's just doing this for attention. She always wanted to be special." Madison sobbed something about the baby. Kevin muttered, "You'll regret this." And my mother whispered, "You were never meant to have that apartment." Click. I ended the recording. The next morning, I emailed the file to Jeremy. It didn't take long. By Monday morning, he called. "Their attorney reached out," he said. "They want to schedule mediation. You'll have to be ready." I stood in the middle of my freshly painted living room, walls pale gray and full of light. It smelled like lavender and fresh starts. I ran a hand along the windowsill. "I was born ready," I said, but the truth was, I wasn't born ready. I made myself ready, and this time I wasn't giving anything up without a fight. Funny thing about sitting across from your family at a conference table. They stop calling you sweetheart and start calling you selfish. The room smelled like a mix of lemony floor polish and stale coffee, neutral beige walls, a round table, 2 water pitchers, and a fake ficus in the corner. This wasn't a courtroom, but it might as well have been. There were no framed photos, no soft music, just silence punctuated by throat clearing and the quiet hiss of the air conditioner. Jeremy sat to my left, his legal pad open, 2 pens clipped neatly to the top. I wore my best slacks and a pressed navy blouse. Professional, unemotional, steady, at least on the outside. On the inside, my hands were cold and my stomach felt hollow. Across from me sat the people I once called my support system. Denise Carter, my mother, had on her Sunday pearls and a look of practiced devastation. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I hadn't seen a single tear fall. Ron, my dad, barely looked up. His arms were crossed over his chest like a brick wall, his silence more pointed than any words. Madison, 2 chairs away, kept her head down. Her eyes were red, but she didn't speak. Kevin sat next to her, arms tight, jaw tighter. He didn't blink when I walked in. The opposing lawyer, a polished man in a gray suit and rectangular glasses, opened a yellow folder and said, "We're here today to resolve a family dispute that we all hope can be settled amicably." Jeremy didn't waste time. "Let's begin with ownership documentation." He slid a binder across the table, flipping it open to the page marked with a blue tab. "This is a copy of Hannah Carter's will. It clearly states that her property be divided equally between her 2 granddaughters, Brielle and Madison. There's no language permitting sole occupancy, nor is there any transfer of ownership to Denise or Ronald Carter." The lawyer nodded politely, like this was all routine, but I saw his shoulders stiffen. He knew where this was going. Mom leaned forward, voice cracking. "She didn't mean for this. That house is our home. You know that, Brielle. You know." "I do," I said calmly, "but it's also mine. Half of it is, legally and morally." Kevin jumped in then. "You don't need it. You live in that apartment now. This is about spite." I turned to Jeremy. "May I?" He nodded. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small USB stick. Jeremy handed it across the table. "This is a recording of what occurred on April 23rd outside Ms. Carter's residence. 15 minutes of verbal harassment, threats, and emotional intimidation. You'll also find printouts of public Facebook posts from Mrs. Carter, including one calling for prayers for the soul of a selfish daughter who lost her way." That daughter, to be clear, is my client. There was a long, strained silence. My father shifted, finally speaking for the first time. "Cold. This is cold, Brielle. You used to have a heart." I looked at him. "You think setting boundaries is heartless?" Madison blinked fast but still didn't speak. Jeremy cleared his throat. "My client is not requesting anything beyond her legal right. However, if an agreement is not reached today, we're prepared to proceed to court." A heart emoji from Pastor Lewis. A crying face from the neighbor who once called me the quiet one. I wasn't tagged, but I didn't have to be. Everyone knew. Fake sympathy, thinly veiled judgment. "We're thinking of you. Some people forget where they come from." Family first, always. I blocked them all. I opened a new document. The heading, Notice of Intent to Sell Inherited Property. I didn't fill it out that night, but I saved the file, like a promise to myself. 2 days later, it escalated. I heard the banging before I even reached the door. Through the peephole, I saw Madison's tear-streaked face, Kevin pacing behind her like a caged animal, and my mother, flushed, tight-lipped, eyes wild. I didn't open the door. Instead, I hit record on my phone. For 15 minutes, I stood behind the door as they shouted, "You're tearing this family apart. What kind of daughter does this after all we've done? She's just doing this for attention. She always wanted to be special." Madison sobbed something about the baby. Kevin muttered, "You'll regret this." And my mother whispered, "You were never meant to have that apartment." Click. I ended the recording. The next morning, I emailed the file to Jeremy. It didn't take long. By Monday morning, he called. "Their attorney reached out," he said. "They want to schedule mediation. You'll have to be ready." I stood in the middle of my freshly painted living room, walls pale gray and full of light. It smelled like lavender and fresh starts. I ran a hand along the windowsill. I was born ready, I said, but the truth was, I wasn't born ready. I made myself ready, and this time I wasn't giving anything up without a fight. Funny thing about sitting across from your family at a conference table. They stop calling you sweetheart and start calling you selfish. The room smelled like a mix of lemony floor polish and stale coffee, neutral beige walls, a round table, 2 water pitchers, and a fake ficus in the corner. This wasn't a courtroom, but it might as well have been. There were no framed photos, no soft music, just silence punctuated by throat clearing and the quiet hiss of the air conditioner. Jeremy sat to my left, his legal pad open, 2 pens clipped neatly to the top. I wore my best slacks and a pressed navy blouse. Professional, unemotional, steady, at least on the outside. On the inside, my hands were cold and my stomach felt hollow. Across from me sat the people I once called my support system. Denise Carter, my mother, had on her Sunday pearls and a look of practiced devastation. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I hadn't seen a single tear fall. Ron, my dad, barely looked up. His arms were crossed over his chest like a brick wall, his silence more pointed than any words. Madison, 2 chairs away, kept her head down. Her eyes were red, but she didn't speak. Kevin sat next to her, arms tight, jaw tighter. He didn't blink when I walked in. The opposing lawyer, a polished man in a gray suit and rectangular glasses, opened a yellow folder and said, "We're here today to resolve a family dispute that we all hope can be settled amicably." Jeremy didn't waste time. "Let's begin with ownership documentation." He slid a binder across the table, flipping it open to the page marked with a blue tab. "This is a copy of Hannah Carter's will. It clearly states that her property be divided equally between her 2 granddaughters, Brielle and Madison. There's no language permitting sole occupancy, nor is there any transfer of ownership to Denise or Ronald Carter." The lawyer nodded politely, like this was all routine, but I saw his shoulders stiffen. He knew where this was going. Mom leaned forward, voice cracking. "She didn't mean for this. That house is our home. You know that, Brielle. You know." "I do," I said calmly, "but it's also mine. Half of it is, legally and morally." Kevin jumped in then. "You don't need it. You live in that apartment now. This is about spite." I turned to Jeremy. "May I?" He nodded. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small USB stick. Jeremy handed it across the table. "This is a recording of what occurred on April 23rd outside Ms. Carter's residence. 15 minutes of verbal harassment, threats, and emotional intimidation. You'll also find printouts of public Facebook posts from Mrs. Carter, including one calling for prayers for the soul of a selfish daughter who lost her way." That daughter, to be clear, is my client. There was a long, strained silence. My father shifted, finally speaking for the first time. "Cold. This is cold, Brielle. You used to have a heart." I looked at him. "You think setting boundaries is heartless?" Madison blinked fast but still didn't speak. Jeremy cleared his throat. "My client is not requesting anything beyond her legal right. However, if an agreement is not reached today, we're prepared to proceed to court." We broke for 10 minutes. I stepped outside and stared at a vending machine, not really seeing it. I remembered the pot roast from the family meeting, the laughter, the betrayal. When we returned, the opposing lawyer was gentler. "We'd like to propose a solution. The house will be sold and the proceeds split 50-50 between Brielle and Madison." Jeremy looked at me. I nodded once. "That's acceptable." Then my mother crumbled. Tears for real this time. "How could you do this to us? To your own family?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let mine crack. I just said, "I already did enough." She stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Or maybe this was the first time she actually saw me. As Jeremy began drafting the agreement, I sat back in my chair. My hands were still cold, but my chest didn't feel so heavy. There was no glee, no revenge. Just space, the kind I'd earned, not begged for. Peace isn't always quiet. Sometimes it sounds like a pen scratching across a contract. 6 months ago, they threw cake in my face. Now I sip wine under the soft hum of my own pendant lights, the glass cool between my fingers, the air heavy with lavender and fresh paint. The apartment doesn't echo anymore. The living room has a soul now, soft blue walls, hand-me-down books, and a rug that somehow ties the whole space together. The kitchen finally works like it should. I replaced the warped cabinet doors, installed a new backsplash, and even managed to coax life out of a basil plant on the sill. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm still renting someone else's idea of home. But then I remember, this is mine. Every corner, every decision. On the bookshelf, tucked between an old copy of Little Women and a ceramic bowl from Sierra's last pottery class, sits Grandma's photo. She's young in it, probably around my age, and her smile is almost knowing. Beside her is the final folder from Jeremy, neatly labeled and signed. I like to think she'd be proud, maybe not of the fight it took, but of the quiet after, the peace. The house sold faster than I expected. A newlywed couple with a baby on the way bought it. They wanted a fixer-upper with good bones. Madison and I each walked away with just over $175,000. She used hers for a down payment on a home with Kevin, somewhere out in Greeley, I heard. Our parents moved in with them. I suppose in the end they got what they wanted, a family under one roof. Just without me. I used my share differently. A small real estate fund, a bit into stocks, some into my retirement account. The rest I saved. For the unexpected. For the kind of emergencies that don't come with casseroles or sympathy cards. Sierra came by last weekend. She brought iced tea and that loud laugh that always fills a room. We sat on the balcony, watching the sun stretch long shadows across the neighborhood. She asked if I'd heard from them. I told her the truth. I hadn't. No calls, no messages, not even a stray thinking of you from some distant cousin. But I did hear things, through mutual friends. Madison had a baby, a boy, 7 pounds, 6 ounces. There was a wedding too, apparently, small, tasteful, a backyard affair. I wasn't invited, no one said why, they didn't have to. I used to wonder if silence meant they'd forgotten me. Now I know it just means I stopped playing the role they wrote for me. I was always the placeholder, the dependable one, the you'll understand when you're older sister. And when I stopped bending, they stopped calling. That night, after Sierra left, I sat out on the balcony again. A soft breeze teased the curtains. My phone buzzed with a photo, sent from an unknown number. A baby in a blue onesie swaddled and sleeping. No caption, just the image. I stared at it longer than I meant to. Not out of longing, but out of curiosity. For a moment, I thought I should feel something more. Regret, maybe. Anger. But all I felt was stillness. The kind that comes not from running away, but from arriving. I deleted the photo, not out of spite, just clarity. I don't need reminders of a family that asked for pieces of me and flinched when I stopped giving. Later that week, I framed Grandma's will and hung it in my office corner. Not as a trophy, but as a boundary, a reminder. That I built this life with blistered hands and bruised pride. That peace isn't always born from forgiveness. Sometimes it's born from letting go, and no one gets to take it from me again. 6 months ago, they called me selfish for saying no. But as I sit alone tonight, surrounded by things I built with quiet effort, I know peace doesn't always come with applause. It often comes with distance. Sometimes walking away isn't bitterness, it's survival. We're taught to keep the family together even when it fractures us, but there's quiet strength in choosing dignity over dysfunction. If this story reminded you of something in your own life, I hope you know it's never too late to set a boundary or to begin again on your own terms. Feel free to share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear how you define home.